Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. This is episode number 185 of the show. And every week I bring you the round of the week's best LitRPG news, reviews, and author interviews. This week I have 8 new LitRPG reviews for you. I know, I'm surprised that I was able to get through 8 stories this week. But this week I'll be reviewing The Heroic Villain number 2, The Idol System book number 4, Aurora's Rift, 30 to 50 Feral Hogs, a Crematoria Online, a little bit short story, Luxury Cafe Owner, also When Hell Froze, Bloody Betty book number 1, then also Dungeons of the Crooked Mountains, Underdog book number 1, and last but not least, Ball of Light, Evolution. So 8 LitRPG novels and short stories to review for you this week. But before we get into that, of course, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with our first story, which is about Vasily Mejenko, actually. Earlier this week on the podcast, this last weekend, I actually had a chance to chat with Vasily Mejenko, who is the author of the Way the Shaman series, Galacticon, the Dark Paladin series. He's also co-authored a series, the Bard of Barleona, and he's been doing some editing and publishing as well, which I'll talk about in the interview, of course. We kind of just chat. It was a little more of a casual chat this time than like a straight author interview where he was promoting something. We did talk about his latest series, of course, the Invasion series, first book titled Second Chance, which is set in the same Barleona universe that the Way the Shaman is set in. This is actually super surprising. Like I intended to ask him just a couple questions about like a couple characters, especially the second tiefling in that novel. And I was hoping he would send me something, but before I even asked the question, like he started spilling the beans on like some really cool plot stuff for that particular series, and it was a very interesting conversation, even just on that level. But even beyond that, we kind of just had conversations about what's like being a parent and a writer at the same time, balancing that, also his work in translating American LitRPG with author's permission, of course, like their arrangements, and how that project has gone publishing in Russia that way, and also some of his future plans, including his novels, and also his plans apparently to hopefully attend a convention in the United States in November. So all kinds of interesting things there. Go check it out. It'll be a LitRPG podcast, episode number 184. That's why this one's 185. But it's a very fun conversation. And if you like Vasily Mejenko, I think you'll enjoy that. A little bit of a conversation we had. Okay. Also in LitRPG news, we have one deal from C.M. Carney. He was nice enough to let us know that his latest novel is actually out right now. I think he'd originally planned for it to pop up on the 16th, but it came, Amazon was very nice to him and published it a day early. But he's doing this whole promotional thing to help promote the fifth book in his series, which is called The Forsaken God. He's giving away the first book for free. That's right, first book for free. Free is always a fun price for me. And it's actually a very entertaining story. The series on the whole, also entertaining. But he's doing some nice price reductions for some of the series as the week goes on. So if you go check him out on Amazon, we have a link in the show notes for his series. And also he's doing a contest where he's giving away stuff. Link in the show notes for that as well. It's done through a company called Gleam. So they'll have like rules and links for you to click on and whatever to sign up for that contest. So there you go. That's all the news. Very short week. Also out now, though. I think there's stories that are out now. Haven't had a chance to read them. May not ever get to them sometimes, unfortunately. But I'm letting you know because you're the readers, and it's always good to know when your new series comes out. The 6th book in the Eden's Gate series called The Ascent is out now. The 6th book in the Stonehaven Link series from Carrie Summers is out now, called Thrones of the Ancients. A new series from Eric Ugeland is actually out currently. It's called Scamps and Scoundrels, LitRPG Game Lit Adventure, The Bad Guys, Book 1. Also out is the second book in the Guardian Craft series called Iron Age Demons from Eden Red. Just to be aware that her titles generally have adult content, like sexual situations, graphic sex sometimes. I'm hearing that this one is not as much leaning in that particular vein, but just as an FYI. Also, we just talked about Chris CM Carney. The fifth book in that series is out currently, The Forsaken God of the Realms, book number 5. Also out, of course, is The World's Strongest Wizard Becomes a Manaless, a fantasy LitRPG series, volume 1. I happened to come across it today when I was looking for new LitRPG stuff. So here it is. It's out. I haven't had a chance to read it. I did peek to make sure it was actually had like something LitRPG related. It does. So it's hit on the list for you guys. New LitRPG audiobooks. This is a very exciting list, but there are a lot of great stories. I've got LitRPG audiobooks out this week, including Shadow Sun Survival, which is the first book in that series by Dave Wilmarth. We recently reviewed the second book in that series, which was really well done. This is a post-apocalyptic LitRPG adventure survival stuff. There's survival stuff. There's post-apocalyptic stuff. Aliens, monsters. Kingdom building, town building, all that kind of stuff. So definitely go check that out. Very interesting. I haven't listened to the audiobook, but I really enjoyed the ebook version of it. Also out is Skyflare, Rise to Omniscience, book number 3. The Mayor of Newtown, a very entertaining story as well, is out as an audiobook. Definitely go check that out. I really enjoyed the ebook version of that. The second book is already out as an ebook, so if you listen to the first, ebook for the second is out. So there you go. Also, we have the titled Dungeon Player, a LitRPG Dungeon Core Adventure. That is out as an audiobook, as is the second book in the Axe Druid series, Into the Dragon's Den, entertaining story. Enjoy that one. The Gamer, book number 2 by Gabriel Rathweg is out. Just as a reminder, the author is doing the audiobook recording for this series. So he's the writer. He's also going to be the editor and, of course, the narrator. So that is a very interesting combination and choice. I've listened to it. There are a few things. I've listened to like samples of it, I should say. I've read the books, enjoyed the books immensely. They're really it's a nice series. Travel back in time, RPG interface, but it also deals with like some interesting time correction choice. I don't want to spoil it, but it's set before and during the westward expansion of like imperial powers into the North American and South American and Central American settings. So very interesting stuff. So there it is, audiobook for you to listen to. Go check it out. And there you go. On to upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I read a bunch of stuff that's coming out in the near future. That includes, on August the 16th, a Mage Champion, the third book in the Chronicles of Her series. August the 19th, it'll be Ruins of Rimnar. This is the 6th book in that series. On August the 20th, it'll be the third book in the Firebrand series, which is a Verdanga Airlines side series called Path of the Blood Phoenix, for you folks who've enjoyed that particular series. The second book in the Dragonheart series is out on August the 22nd, called Dragonheart Iron Will. The August the 30th, it'll be the third and final book, apparently according to the author, in the Galacticon series, A Check for a Billion. You actually get to hear Vasily Mahenko's views on that particular series if you listen to that author interview. The August the 31st, it'll be Zones of Lacria, the Dragon Gate, on August 31st as well. Darkness Named, Darkness Online. August 31st, Endless Fantasy Online, The Phoenix Kingdom. On September the 1st, The Force Silence, a LitRPG Fantasy Adventures on Brand series, book number 6. I'm a fan of this series. I fell out a little while ago. I skipped one of the books, and I can't continue on with it until I go back and read all the other ones. But I enjoy this one. Also, the September the 2nd, World of Kark, book number 1, A Game of Villains. September the 6th, it'll be Cliffs of Eldamar, the second book in the Karassian Online series. This one is new to the list as well. September the 8th, Daniel Shinhofen plans to publish the 8th book in the Alpha World series called Gamer for Love. What an adorable title and adorable cover. But about on September the 8th, there is no pre-order currently. The author just let us know on the podcast that it will be out then. On September the 9th, it'll be Blood of Fate, World 99, book number 1. September the 10th, Gloominess +2. They didn't care for book 1, but there's a second book coming out. September the 17th, The Bibliomancer. Really looking forward to seeing how this turns out. Again, that's collaboration between James Hunter and Dakota Kraut, set in the Completionist Chronicles universe. On September the 19th, Skulls of Atlantis. September the 30th, this one's also new to the list. No pre-order for it yet as well. Author just sent a message of the podcast saying, hey, here's some cover art. This is when it's going to be out, hopefully, on time, called Shadow Sun Rebellion, the third book in that series by Dave Omar. So you have a recent review for book number 2, the audiobook for book number 1 out now, and here's your notice that it'll be out. The third book in that series, as an ebook, will be out on September the 30th. So that Dave is definitely kicking butt on his production schedule, so good for him. But the third book in that series, which I'm looking forward to reading, will be out on September the 30th. Sometime in September, it just should be the second book in their first song series by Blaze Corbin and Alton Foster. October the 3rd, Quest for Power, a Hero Online book number 2. On October the 6th, Dungeons of the Gods, Legends Online book number 2. October the 17th, it'll be the second story in the Bad Guy series by Eric Uglin called Second Story Man. Again, the first book just came out this week, today, and the second book will be out on October the 17th, so there you go. And Dead Man's Retinue, this third book in the NPC's Path series, will be out on October 21st, and new to the list, it'll be A Dark Path, a Grimdark LitRPG, out on November the 1st. And Avatar of Light, Interworld Network book number 2, November the 7th, 2019. That will be out as well. So that's all I know for the near future. It's a nice long list for you to plan your reading schedule, or your own releases if you're an author. That's something I do with the list. On to new releases and reviews, though. And first on the podcast today is going to be The Heroic Villain, book number 2, written by Charles Dean. It is 373 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. After conquering all of Hesse, creating a devilish new dungeon, and establishing himself as the villain that everyone loves to hate, Lucas decides to continue his quest to create new content by taking over as a dungeon master on the mainland. Unlike the dominant force on the island he left behind, however, the once mighty Imperium only controls a single capital city in a rapidly shrinking territory, leaving a group of scheming nobles to bicker among themselves and fight over scraps of land. Seen as an upstart and rabble-rouser, Lucas is instantly shunned and must struggle to find somewhere to begin building his new base. Now, after declaring himself the enemy of every man in the city, and with every player in the region hunting his head to claim the bounty placed there, Lucas has to decide which allies he can trust as he fights to stay alive long enough to establish a new lair and gain a foothold in a hostile land. Introducing new monsters, a curious group of new members, and flashy new spells, this game LitRPG adventure follows Lucas as he writes his own story as the greatest villain the game world has ever known. Okay. Full disclosure, I received an advanced copy of this novel. I actually did some minor beta reading for the author. I did purchase a copy when it became available. So there you go. This story, first I'll say, but I really like book number 1 of the series. Book number 1 had some very interesting emotional tones that really resonated with him personally. And that character arc for the main character, that emotional journey in book 1, was definitely like a big highlight for me. In book number 2, a lot of the emotionalism is not existing. I mean, it's still there, but it's not the same one. And I absolutely understand why it has to be the case, because that arc was kind of resolved in book number 1, right? So book number 2 has to be something different. In book number 2, what it does to kind of replace that is it ups the villain stuff in the series. And I think that it's a good story. It's very enjoyable, but it's enjoyable in a slightly different way for me than book 1. Book 1, I think one of the things I thought was kind of lacking, according to the title, was he's a heroic villain. And in book 1, that arc is just kind of starting, where he's a lot more hero than villain. And that is definitely addressed in book number 2. Like there's definitely a big step towards the villainous side of that particular title. And I think a lot of readers are really going to enjoy that if you like that kind of story, of course. The main character really leads into bold villainous actions that I think actually readers are going to empathize. Even if you don't like a hard... like hardcore villainy, like evil kind of stuff. That's not what this is. This more along those like the main character is being bold and kind of doing the things a lot of us would love to do in real life, except that we have, social constructs and social rules and laws that would stop you from doing these things, even if you have the impulse to do so. Like calling out people for being fake. And being fake in good ways, or battling smug jerk players, or folding the plans of like not good NPCs, like bad people, with even more devious plans of your own. The main character really does, he gets into that role of being a villain. I actually really enjoyed the way the story kind of unfolds in that respect. Like I said, this is kind of the big thing for the story that I think it's good about it. The main character just doesn't suddenly become evil. He rationalizes it. He thinks like, oh, these are my impulses in the first place, and I can kind of, let myself do them because I'm a villain in the story. I've intentionally created this mythos around myself and being the villain, so I should probably, lean into it because I'm trying to save this game. I'm trying to get players to come back and be interested in this storyline that I'm kind of creating on my own. And I really enjoyed that kind of like reasoning to do the things. It makes perfect sense in the story, but I like the internal rationalization of it because it makes everything else that comes after it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, it just kind of reveled in kind of an odd way, like, oh, that is a terrible thing to do, man. But I get why you did it, and it makes perfect sense in the story. And that's kind of the thing I liked about the story the most. I like it in a different way than I did in book one. Book one, again, had some very interesting concept, and again, some things that resonated with me on a very emotional level. But this one has good things as well, just different good things. Some of the things that are going to be expanding in the particular novel or the series, the main character also kind of puts together this harem thing going on, and it's not the kind of harem where it's like just hardcore sex or anything like that. It's more along the lines of the Tenchi Muyo kind of harem, where it's like a bunch of like very attentive ladies, and again, it's tying very specifically into that villain persona of him stealing women from apparently like the good guys, who in the story, like the good guys are just players who fulfill the quest line, and suddenly they have this NPC companion who's in love with them, and the main character definitely flips the script on them in like stealing them away. Like, and it's a very funny way to do it, and it's very interesting, and I really enjoyed the way that it happened in the story. There is no graphic sex in the story. There are, at the end of the story, some inferences of sex, and I'm okay with that. It's a very skippable end kind of epilogue thing going on there, but it also definitely plays into the kind of character arc of the story, getting over his emotional losses, and it makes perfect sense in that respect. So I'm okay with it, even if it's not like my favorite scene, if I'm being honest. But it makes sense to me, and I'm definitely think it's gonna, like, that whole concept is going to appeal to like some readers who enjoy the kind of stuff. So it all makes perfect sense. So it's a good story for me. The custom game mechanics in this series are still on par. You get some more explanations, but you're not getting as many like crunchiness numbers as in book one necessarily, because all the game mechanics have already been established. There is more dungeon building in the story, just like there was in book one. There's monster taming in book two, which I appreciated. And I actually really enjoy the way that the author has his game mechanics established, and he doesn't make them wishy-washy. He doesn't bend the rules for the game. Instead, he creates an intelligent character who's doing smart, intelligent things with the game mechanics to kind of either exploit them or to maximize them, so that his group can survive against superior, higher level forces. And that makes perfect sense to me. And that's what makes this kind of story, because it's smart and intelligent, and it uses the game mechanics to establish instead of like breaking them just so the main character can win or something. Instead, the author works within the rules that he's established, and he makes an intelligent character instead. So I always appreciate that. Overall, this is a good story, and again, it leads more heavily towards the villain part of the heroic villain series title, and I think that's going to be the big selling point. I think that's the thing people enjoy the most. So for me, I had a good time with it. Gets a score 7.6 out of 10. That is the Heroic Villain, book number 2, with the score 7.6 out of 10. And up next, we have The Idol System, book number 4, written by Pagaz. It is 276 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Once bound by his morals, John has been released from his chains. The sinner system will finally come to reveal its true potential in his hands. Together, with his gift for chaos, it will forge his path to victory. One that will finally settle his grudges once and for all. One that will defend what matters most to him. For as much as a man changes, his priorities remain the same. So there we go. That is the specifically worded novel description. Okay, this is the 4th book in the series. It continues the slice of life adventure and power progression in the series that has been a staple. The main character is kind of overpowered at this point, and the scope of the story gets bigger as he deals with nations, even planets, as the main character travels through this universe. I think the big draw of this again is that going to be it's a villainous story. And apparently that's a theme for the week on the podcast. But again, the main character stops being the hero. And part of that is because and this is minor spoiler if you haven't read the series, this was done in book 3. His wife is in a coma and there was such a situation of all that. But to save her, he has to gain power and he has to gain it quickly. And so he does what would be considered bad and villainous things, even if it is for a good purpose. And there's a whole game mechanic system that is established in the series that justifies it and makes the RPG progression make sense. The Sin system. And it was very interesting to see the main character travel from planet to planet to cultures and to see the world building there, and to see him use that Sin system to tempt and bully and intimidate his way into getting other people to sin and to kind of exploit that established system, which is very interesting way. That's kind of the theme of this entire series. How is the main character going to exploit the new system? This book, and it never ceases to surprise me. It's never a disappointment. It's always fun to see that exploitation happen, which is what I like about the series. The game mechanics of the novel, again, the idol system is still there. There are other more game mechanics that have been established for the series. They all continue to exist. This one leans a little bit more towards cultivation sometimes, which I think was a comment I had in the last book as well. You don't see as many full character sheets anymore, which is perfectly fine by me. And there are some more regular updates on certain skills and the idol workers completing and information about the toxic and the life systems and that power gathering thing. But again, the mechanics are just a little bit more muted in favor of cultivation. That's just the way it is. Overall, the novel is still good. If you've been a fan of the books 1 through 3, you're not going to be disappointed by book number 4. So it was enjoyable. I had a good time with it. There's even some nostalgia stuff happening here where the main character returns to some of the earlier planets from book 1. I thought was a nice little touch to kind of tie everything up together. Again, this is a slightly darker tone. And I think people who enjoy that or fans of the series were still going to be entertained by this. So had a good time with it. That's going to be a 7.5 out of 10 score for me. Good stuff. The Idol System, a LitRPG series, book number 4, The Sins, with a score of 7.5 out of 10. And next up we have Aurora's Rift, Celestial Arcanists, book number 1, written by Emmy Mears. It is 269 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Evie Winterborn has had it. After 5 exhausting years of video game marketing for a struggling MMORPG and one too many instances of her ideas getting ignored by her boss, Evie's fortune seems to have a change when a chance encounter introduces her to her company's rival just as she quits her nightmare job. Evie's dreamed to work on games themselves until her ex cheated her and her team out of their beloved project success. And it seems that the rival CEO knows her story and her potential. As a gift, he gives her the chance to play his blockbuster single-player fantasy game, Aurora's Rift. And the world within just might change Evie's life forever, inside the game and out. So there we go. There's a little bit more, but it doesn't matter. This is the author of this particular novel has a dozen fantasy and urban fantasies to her name, but this is her first little bitty story, and you can kind of tell. The beginning of the story, I think, is probably my favorite section of this novel. Actually does a really good job of setting up the main character, making you care about her very quickly, And it definitely explains why the main character is going to spend an extended amount of time in the single player game. And again, this is that's first like 15%. 10% is my favorite part of the story, because you can tell the author has a load of experience just kind of doing character development stuff, and it plays it really well. Like the novel description does a good job of like kind of summarizing it, but nice stuff. After that, though, when it gets into the actual game world, things get mixed. The game story portion of the novel really just, for me at least, felt like a fantasy story with dedicated sections that dealt with RPG mechanics. And again, this might be just a consequence of this being the author's first RPG story. She may really be a gamer, but she writes fantasy and urban fantasy novels, and those sections are not poorly written, but they feel like they conflict with the game stuff sometimes. Like she's definitely leaning more towards the fantasy section, which is more of what she's written previously, and that's perfectly fine. But I could tell, and it kind of bothered me. Like there were just dedicated sections to character creation, or sections for assigning stat points and picking spells. But the majority of the rest of the novel feels more like a fantasy story, and part of that is the setup of the story, and kind of the premise and the way that the game world is set up. It feels like the main character is supposed to be in this virtual reality first person single player game, rather, right? So I go into this with an expectation of that kind of setup where the main character's in a game. It's very gamey. The main character is aware she's a gamer. She's doing gamer stuff, and that's not what this is. Instead, when the main character logs into the story, and then this is a minor spoiler, instead she lives. There's this system in place where she lives as one of the natives of this world, and she has memories of this, and whether they're implanted or they're actually, she's living through the situation, doesn't matter. But what it comes off as essentially is that instead of the main character being the main character from outside the game, she feels like a fantasy character who grew up in this world as an elf, and her thoughts process in the story is like, oh, my uncle so and so is going to be okay with this because we've had this whole history of like enjoying comforting strangers or whatever, or she name drops, and there's a bunch of world history and lore that the main character just kind of spouts on, and I feels like, oh, she hasn't earned it because that's not what was presented to me as the reader. She didn't actually learn it on her. It's just like, it feels like it's a download, and she just magically knows a bunch of lore and stuff, and she's conveying it to us. And I'm like, it just felt like there was this weird disconnect from what my expectations were as a reader, with the premise of this being set up in a single player virtual reality game as LitRPG instead of a fantasy story set on a RPG planet, which is a very different setting. And had that been that setting, this would have made a lot more sense, and it would have, I think, done better with me personally. But because I had these other expectations, and there was just this word mix, it just ended up not working for me, and that's kind of what it comes down to. The story itself, again, not poorly written. The author has a plethora of titles. She has fans that really enjoyed the way that the story is written. But again, it's also because it leans more towards, I think, that other works that she has. The magic system in the story is, again, more of a fantasy terms. There are. This is LitRPG. I don't want to make sure that's pretty clear. There are stats. There are character sheets. There are spell descriptions, there are quest descriptions, all that stuff exists in the story, but they feel mostly, again, like separated, and it's kind of hit or miss whether or not they were even acknowledged in the story. And again, this just feels kind of like I'm going to say rookie mistake of like somebody who's coming from a different genre and jumping into this, but that's what it feels like. For example, the fantasy terms, again, fantasy magic system, isn't it really in game terms? It's described this way. I'll read you a couple lines from it. It says, I laid the lines of the trying threads across each other, over and under, around to form a lattice, threading heat into the spell. And again, that's because the magic system feels very fantasy, even though like those particular spells have spell descriptions. They're doing things that are outside of those spell descriptions because it's more of a magical fantasy kind of system, which is very flexible. It does whatever the author needs it to do, right? But in a virtual reality game world system, that's not the case. Like you can't, I mean, that doesn't make sense to my gamer brain. In a game, the rules are the rules, and you can't just magically bend them or do something different just because you want to. You can in a fantasy story, but in the LitRPG story, the expectation is it's different. So there it is. I talked about the RPG stuff already, that they exist. There are stats in the story, character sheets, all the good stuff. The main character does improve her stats when she levels. But again, the stats don't really have an impact on the story. Having low strength doesn't really impede the main character. Having high magic doesn't really help her out very much. And again, though the spells have inserted descriptions, they don't really actually have any limits. The main character kind of does what she wants with them, whether it's making new things or whatever the case is. And there's no real, limit to them. It's just, they are the way they are, even though they have, some, like I said, the author went out of her way to make sure that the descriptions are there, but they don't really seem to matter to the story as far as I could tell. Again, I called it fantasy flexible. Overall, not a terrible story, not poorly written in any way, shape, or form, but it didn't work for me because, again, I always felt like the game mechanics really didn't matter to the story. It is, again, technical LitRPG. There are levels, there's all those descriptions I talked about. But again, if I took all those things out, I think it would actually work better as a fantasy story. And because that's what a lot of the story felt like to me. It's an opinion. And again, if it was set up as either a portal fantasy or just like a story that started in a fantasy RPG world, I think it would have felt better because the way the story unfolds to the main character knowing how this over would have just made more sense to me. But it didn't. The premise is this is a virtual reality game with a lady from our world who's just jumping in for the first time as a single player campaign. And so there was just the schism for me. There you go. Fans of the author's other fantasy series may like this more than I would. For me, give the score 6 out of 10. That's Aurora's Rift, Celestial Arcanist, book number 1 with the score of 6 out of 10. Okay. Up next is 30 to 50 Feral Hogs, a Crematoria Online LitRPG short story written by Matthew Barbeller. This is 42 pages, $2.99, available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Log into a new life. Middle-aged and soon-to-be divorced Neil Cash is sick of his life and desperately needs a change. He's one of the first people to log into Crematoria Online, the latest in video game tech where players transfer their consciousnesses into the game world. Let it get under your skin. Neil plays as a skinwalker, a class that lets you take on wild aspects of animals from the world of Crematoria Online and change form at will. Feral hogs run amok. Neil stumbles across a cabin in the woods whose occupant is only concerned with protecting his children from attack by the 30 to 50 feral hogs that threaten his safety. This is a standalone adventure. So there we go. This is a short story. It doesn't need a long review. I read the author's separate, larger, LitRPG story, which is the Crematoria Online. Didn't care for it. Didn't work for me. There were issues with it. Go read the review if you want to check those out. But I like this short story. I actually think a lot of the issues I had with that main series are really solved here. Like, this is a focused, very understandable, very relatable, well, not relatable, but very satisfying short story that where the main character, he's a skinwalker class playing in this dark and sometimes gory fantasy virtual reality game. He explores his class. He deals with threats of the forest. There's good action. I mean, it's a straightforward and satisfying story, which was not the case with the other series. But this is good. I really did enjoy it. I should say that after writing a review, there were some other reviews on Amazon that pointed out that this is apparently the title's a reference to some meme. I don't get it. I mean, I think I looked it up later, but I'm like, okay, it doesn't change my enjoyment of the story, but it may for you. So just be aware that exists there. But for the most part, this is really for me was a straight LitRPG story, and I enjoyed it. I had a nice time with it. It gets a score of 7.5 out of 10 for me. The pricing's it's definitely, don't buy this. Get it on Kindle Unlimited. 42 pages for like $3 is way too expensive. But if you have KU, definitely go check this out. It's an enjoyable little short story. Score of 7.5 out of 10. 30 to 50 Feral Hogs, a Crematoria Online LitRPG short story with the score of, again, 7.5 out of 10. Okay, up next is Luxury Cafe Owner, written by Andrew Reese. It is 266 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Alan Pender, a bored 20-something college graduate with a degree in general studies, woke up the day after graduation and suddenly realized his degree was useless and he had to get a job. As he walked around looking for help, wanted signs, a series of unfortunate accidents occurred, resulting in him entering a coma. When he woke up, he discovered he'd been granted a mysterious system. However, the system finally provided him with some direction about what he should do with his life. Follow Alan and as he explores his newfound calling. So there you go. That's the novel description. This is a real-life RPG story that is satirical. It's intentionally parody, and it's funny. That's kind of the draw of it. It's the main character gets a sentient RPG interface, but the system just wants to build up and train the main character so he can create the universe's best luxury cafe. Everything else in the story is a chill slice of life adventure, and you kind of just follow the main character as he quests, gain coffee-themed powers, realizes the power of the ultimate cafe. Just be aware that this is a very specific kind of story. It's fairly light on the RPG mechanics. And it's a slower paced story. That's kind of an issue for some people who, when you look at the Amazon reviews, that was definitely an issue for some people. It's like, this is too slow. Nothing really is happening. I'm like, yeah, that's a slice story. It's something that world. It's a slower story. There is no action or fighting in this thing at all. So if that's what you're into, that's what you're feeling like today or whatever, this is not the story for you. It really isn't. It's a very chill, sometimes too chill, kind of slice of life adventure where you're literally just following the main character as he does stuff, whether it's getting his first job at a cafe or as a barista and dealing with customers and getting his ultimate cup of coffee powers, or getting his own cafe and trying to figure out social media. There's literally a chapter where the main character deals with social media issues, and I'm like, okay, that's a deliberately slowly paced story, and it just is what it is. If that's something that appeals to you, don't read it. I mean, but if you can deal with that, this was an enjoyable story for me, I should say, because I'm okay with that though. I'm okay with like a very chill, kind of relaxed, kickback story like this. The only minor negative grab I probably had personally was that the main character came off kind of whiny sometimes, but that's part of his character development. I get that. Again, there is no action here. It really is just follow the main character as he gets his coffee-filled adventures. But again, the things that I want to highlight are, there's a good sense of humor. There's a very snarky RPG interface. There's nice banter between the interface and the main character. Those are probably the bigger things there. It's intentionally a parody of system stories where like somebody gets a magical system and they go do a thing. The author at the end of the novel in the afterward says that was his intention, and he does that. He also wanted to try to, twist the trope a little bit, and I think he does that as well. But again, this is kind of a slower story, so just be aware of that. I liked it. I like those things about it. It mostly kept me entertained. I don't think I'd read a second book in this. I think this is supposed to be a standalone story by the ending. But it's one of those, like, it's a one and done. I don't think I would read a second book in the series, just because of the way it's set up and structured. Perfectly fine as a book one. But again, on the lower end of my enjoyment scale. So for me, it's a 7.2 out of 10. Good story, just again, on the lower end of that. So that's Luxury Cafe Owner with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next we have When Hell Froze, Bloody Benny, book number 1, written by Forrest Minter. It is 211 pages, $3 even. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's very short description. Benefice Church, also known as Benny, is a special forces operative against the demonic forces invading her people. That is, until a mission behind enemy lines goes awry. Now captive of the demons, what will be her fate? So there we go. There's actually not a lot of information there. I wouldn't have known it was a LitRPG story, except that I took the time to actually look into it and read it. And that's the only, because the novel description there does not say anything about it, but there is a RPG mechanics after about the 22% mark in the story. It starts though as a general fantasy story. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be in another dimension, but it's regular humans fighting against demons and kind of like this seemingly endless war. At about the 20% mark, the main character is captured by the demons and is gifted with the devil system. There's an acronym for it. It's an acronym for something. But it's an RPG upgrade system. So she has to decide what power she has, what character she wants to use to either escape the demons or work with them to help them create peace or some kind of structure there. And so it was a very interesting setup there. So the main character is forced to work with the demons because their squad is held hostage, but it was actually interesting to see her learn about her enemy. because she was raised to think about them a certain way. She was raised to see the demons as mindless killing machines, and she's fought them her whole life, but now she gets to see the other side of that coin. And it's kind of like this enemy me kind of scenario, which wasn't unpleasant. However, the thing that kind of made this not work for me was the fact that the RPG stuff doesn't start until like 22 minutes in the story. I'm like, that is way too long for you to expect me to stick with this story without giving me some kind of little bitty stuff there. But once it's there, it's an okay system. It's not like revolutionary. The author includes lots of descriptions, lots of information, different ways to increase like the power structure, whether it's from gaining demonic followers or from killing enemies. There are different ways to apply points to gain these new powers, and that's perfectly fine. They're clear descriptions. And while I think that the story premise is interesting, the action is well done. It was kind of a challenge for me because one, I never really came to care about the main character. The beginning of the story just kind of drops you into the story road without giving you any kind of setup for it. The main character is already adult. She's already in the special forces unit. And you're just like, here's the thing. I care about this person without giving you a reason. Eventually you get some backstory that may make you like sort of care about the main character. But by that time, 30-40% halfway to the story, I'm like, I already I don't really care that she succeeds or fails. Again, it's not poorly written. It's just that I wasn't invested in it. So even though I read the rest of the story, and again, the action is nicely written, I enjoyed that portion of it. It was never enough to really keep me engaged and keep this on like the good side of my scale, particularly. Again, overall, not a bad story. Just didn't work for me. Again, I mentioned all the things that were issues for me. So there you go. And the rushed ending didn't really help out for me. So for me, this was just kind of a miss. Again, not a bad score, not boring. It just didn't work for me with a score of 6 out of 10. When Hell Froze, Bloody Benny, book number 1, with the score of 6 out of 10. And next we have Dungeons of the Crooked Mountains, Underdog, book number 1, LitRPG series, written by Alexei Ostachuk. I might be saying that wrong, but it's okay. It is 393 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. The author's description. Eric was born in a world governed by the Great System, and the family of Aridin Bergman, a respected miner from Orcus. But the joy of gaining a son was overshadowed by the newborn's terrible affliction. Eric was completely nulled, level 0, and no characteristic points. The only things keeping him from dying were his tiny base supply of life and energy points. The medicine woman who delivered Eric believes this to be the work of the evil spirit Bug. Due to the particular laws of the Great System, Eric cannot use experience essences or characteristic tablets, so he risks having to spend his whole life confined to a bed. But his father finds a solution. He takes out a large bank loan and goes to the capital where he buys in new artifacts of the ancient on the black market, which have no level restrictions. Despite having the artifacts, Eric is still very feeble and everyone in town thinks of him as a freak. But at least he can move on his own, and that gives the Bergmans hope. But alas, it isn't for long. On Eric's 14th birthday, his father and mother die in a mining accident. The bank takes their house, and Eric is left with no choice but to work off the remaining debt in the dungeons of the Crooked Mountains. And so begins the story of a Knowles boy's struggle to survive. Wow, that is wordy. It is. It is not inaccurate. That is literally like the first, 15% of the story. That's essentially the setup of it. So there you go. Full disclosure, I received advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Okay. This novel is written by the same author who wrote the popular Mirror World series. And if you've read that story, you're probably going to like this. I'm assuming you like that story. Why wouldn't you? It's an enjoyable series. From the very first page of the story, I was absolutely hooked in this novel. I really was. What you read in the novel description, that's kind of just like a teaser of like the nice and kind of funny world development that the author does in the story. The main character is born as a null, essentially with low stats and a level of 0. This is not a spoiler because it's in the novel description. I'm just going to say it a little differently because I don't think it does a great job of kind of explaining the setup of the story, essentially everything in this world has a minimal level requirement of a level 1. And because the main character is level 0, he can't do anything. I mean, literally, he without the artifacts the character's father gets him with no stat requirements, which is super rare, the main character wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. But because he has these few artifacts, he can kind of get around, but he's very much a frail kind of character. But as level 1, he still can't use the experience tablets that are the main or this world's way of doing the RPG progression. He can't use skill tablets. He can't use any of the skill ability tablets, which are things that are all dropped from either like mining or resource gathering or killing monsters. That's part of the RPG progression system. So he's kind of just he's SOL for as a part of the premise. And when tragedy strikes, when he's left all alone and he has to settle the family debts, he's sold off to essentially I'm not sure it's inherited debt, and he's sold to a worker's mine, which is again not a concept a lot of Americans are going to be familiar with, but in other countries it is very much a thing. And there are bad people there who want to exploit him. He has to find out essentially a way out of this debtor's camp, or he's going to be stuck there for the rest of his life in an ever-increasing spiral of debt. And so there's some very dark concepts in the story, which I think were very well done. The things I enjoyed about the story in particular are, again, the interesting world building and the fact that the author really makes the RPG stuff part of this world's culture. This isn't transferred to game rules fiction. It isn't a virtual reality LitRPG. It's literally just it's a fantasy RPG world, and this is where the story takes place. But a lot of those kind of worlds never really do anything original with the RPG mechanics, and they never always make it part of like the actual fabric of the culture. This novel does, and I think that's probably the thing I like the most about it. It made kind of the game mechanic stuff literally part of their religion, part of their culture, and part of the way that people exploit it. And I thought that was a very smart and intelligent way of doing this world building. Like there's literally their gods who are called the system and random, who determine all the things that happen in the world. And anything evil is attributed to the god Bug. And I thought that's a very smart way of kind of incorporating those mechanics in like a cultural system. And it makes perfect sense if you think about like, oh, how would a world evolve if there were RPG mechanics in this in a world from like the Stone Age on, right? And so that makes sense. I really enjoyed that. I also like the fact that it's a different kind of RPG progression system where things like XP, stat increases, skills, magic abilities, they're all physical items that drop from either, again, killing or resource gathering. And because they're physical items, they're also considered a commodity that people want to buy or sell or steal and exploit. And that creates this whole kind of cultural system of exploitation with inheritable debt and cold calculating people who are willing to put people into perpetual debt to keep them working and selling their tablets. And this whole cultural thing that was really nicely well done. Overall, the story itself, though, is kind of this underdog story of the main character with this huge disadvantage trying to find a way to turn it into an advantage in a cruel kind of world. And it's a little darker, but it's enjoyable. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to spoil what happens with the Underdog story, but it was a nice journey to go on. It is kind of a slice of life story, but it's quite an enjoyable one. And like I said, the other authors of the series, Merwood, is also very slice of life. So if you like that series, you'll like this one as well. For me, I had a good time with it. It gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. That's Dungeons of the Crooked Mountains Underdog book number 1 with a score of 7.6 out of 10. And here we go. Next one is Ball of Light Evolution, written by A.R. Chen. It is 226 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. After waking up, Steve doesn't know where he is. Heck, he doesn't know what he is. Despite his spotty memory, he's pretty sure he didn't used to be a floating ball of light. Also, he's certain that he's not originally from this dangerous fantasy world. Maybe. Okay, fairly certain. To make things stranger, he seems to be involved in something big, something magical, a game. Who was he before? Will his memories come back? Why does he have an assistant explaining the game's rules to him? He can evolve. There's a countdown timer. One thing Steve does know that he needs to figure out what's going on and fast. If he's playing a game, even a deadly one, he plans to win. So there you go. Some very interesting things. The novel description. Okay. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This story has existed on the world for years. It really has. And it's just now being edited and published. It's actually being published through Blaze Corbin's publishing company. I think it's called Axiom. I can't remember. But he essentially got the author to let him publish it because the author hadn't had any plans to, and I'm glad that he did. This is an entertaining story that I don't think would have been available to a lot of people who just purchased through Amazon. This is a re-monster story, and that's the kind of story where the main character is a monster, whether he's reincarnated or not, and he gets to evolve as part of his progression path. And that's kind of what at the core of what the story is. The main character wakes up as a ball of light with a companion Bonnie, who's his guide. He has to learn about the new rules of his life, which includes gathering energy from animals and kills and other sources to purchase spells and evolve into another monster. And so that's kind of the core of the story. The thing I think that separates this from other stories of this ilk are the world building here. Like a lot of other re-monster stories, their big draw is you get to kind of follow the development of a creature that you don't normally see, which is a monster character. And there are a variety of different mechanics and evolution systems that go into that. But that's kind of the draw. Like you get to see the monster development, which is different. It's still very LitRPG-ish. You get to see all these mechanics. And sometimes you get to see like the evil nature of these monsters. And in this particular case, you get some of that same stuff, not the evil stuff. But in addition to that, this story is set in a fantasy RPG world where you get some actual interaction with the other humans and other cultures in the story. And there's a very good amount of world building here. The early story, the main character comes in contact with a human village, and he kind of has to deal with how he's going to use them or deal with them because they want something from them. Some of them are really greedy. Other ones are really looking for the well-being of the village, and there's a conflicts of personality and culture there, and the main character not really knowing what the situation is because again he's literally just kind of exists here. He doesn't have memories of his past life really, and he definitely doesn't have any memories of this RPG world, and so he has to kind of figure out what to do with this. I'm not sure what happens, but there's definitely a lot of like nice cultural building here. There are threats of this village that also not only introduce action into the story, but again, they expand the world building. The world building is kind of the big thing that I thought was very entertaining. The author not only writes about backgrounds for individual characters, but he talks about the history of the region. He talks about the political situation between villages and the capital and social structures and cultural norms, and even information about like how families name their children and their groupings. The details in the story on this level kind of really made the world feel real. It flushed out a lot for me. It made it more than just like a setting, like a background setting, which I really appreciated. It made the storyline more enjoyable. I cared about the characters, not just the main character, but also all the secondary and tertiary characters because I had information about them and they were made interesting to me. The RPG progression, it's detailed. You get lots of information about evolution, about the magic system, how the main character has to kind of balance how he absorbs energy and how he kind of manages those resources. It's good stuff, and it's seen throughout the entire story. It's really important to the story. It matters. That's what makes it LitRPG. Overall, again, I've read many re-monster stories. It's the kind of story I can kind of enjoy. But this one is set apart because of the good world building, and that's why it really kind of stepped itself up from... It distinguishes itself, I should say, from other kinds of stories like this. And again, I think part of the thing also for me is that this came out years ago, which is before a lot of those stories came out. And so I wish that this had come out then because this would have felt like a lot fresher for a lot of people. I think it would have done super well because it's only come out now. People are already familiar with LitRPG. The market's a little more saturated, but still, it's a good story. I had a good time with it. I definitely encourage you to check it out. That's Ball of Light Evolution with a score of 7.6 out of 10. I had a good time with it. There we go. Okay, that's it, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me talk about LitRPG, this genre that I love, and I can't get enough of the stories, even all these years later. It's still very passionate kind of community and stories that I love. So thanks for hearing me talk about them. If you want to talk to the podcast, want to follow it anywhere, or read the reviews I've done, we've had almost 900 reviews at this point, according to Amazon, and more on our website. So definitely check us out at Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Patreon, on our website at LitRPGpodcast.com. Plenty of places to catch the podcast, including our sister podcast, the LitRPG audiobook podcast, which specializes in LitRPG audiobooks, or just check out the back catalog of reviews and stories or author interviews. Plenty of things for you to enjoy if you're a fan of this genre or you're just getting into it. Lots of really great stories on there that you might want to troll through Amazon to try to search for. Lots of good recommendations, lots of good authors there. So go check us out. We also have links in the show notes for other pages that talk about LitRPG, of course. Definitely check them out. But of course, you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form and help keep us free and ad-friend-free of ads. You can find out all the ways to support the podcast at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.